I'm calling an audible this morning, so hold on. Our sermonic text comes from a lectionary reading that we did not do this morning, and it comes from the prophet Hosea, chapter 11. These are the words that the prophet spoke. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. They shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword rages in their cities. It consumes their oracle priests and devours because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning away from me. To the Most High they call, but he does not raise them up at all. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? Hold on, we had a little technical difficulty. Oh, Israel, there it is. How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zebulun? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. They shall go after the Lord, who roars like a lion. When he roars, his children shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling like birds from Egypt, and like doves from the land of Assyria. And I will return them to their homes, says the Lord. If I were in the Baptist church of my childhood, if I were going to tag this text with a title, it would be Money Can't Buy It. Please pray with me as we go through this. This morning, my friends, life is cyclical. What goes around comes around. My mama used to say it this way, baby, there's nothing new under the sun. My grandmother just said, keep living. 3 years ago, on this very weekend, nearly 30 people were slaughtered in two mass shootings, one in Ohio and one in Texas. 3 years ago, on this very weekend, one of my ministry mentors, the Reverend Robert Griffin, who serves as the executive minister at the Sunshine Cathedral in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, posted a picture of bullet-resistant backpacks being sold in office supply stores with the caption saying, "A whole new level in back-to-school shopping." My response was, this is a sin and a shame. That picture wounded my spirit. A social media acquaintance who I know from religious circles responded to me this way: it may also be a blessing for a kid who needs protection, and one not to let anybody else have the last word. I replied, that might be true, but it is still a sin and a shame that we have to sell them. One of my former students lives in a city where in some neighborhoods, violence is the norm and not the exception, chimed in. Effective bulletproof attire goes for up to $5,000 for a shirt in Chicago, so I don't know what bullets these backpacks are resisting. I laughed, but my spirit was wounded. And so this morning, like so many others before, I stand here in the pulpit having to serve as comforter, confessor, and counselor to the worship community in which I reside. However, there's an additional layer of me standing here this morning, one who is embarking on a new vocational journey, classroom teacher. As a side note, y'all pray for me, but more importantly, pray for these students because they have no idea who's about to show up in their lives. That aside, this morning I still wrestle with the residue of Uvalde. This week I have seen constant reminders of Sandy Hook and of Parkland, and while not a school, Highland Park, and when these things happen, we find ourselves grappling with the questions of why and how and where. Why did this happen? Why did the assailant do what they did? Why did they snap? Why did they do this? How did we get to this point? How did we allow this to happen? I mean, how can we make this better? How? Where did we go wrong as a society? Where did decency and honor and compassion go? And if you are like me, you ask these questions of God. God, why did this happen? God, how could you allow it to happen? Where were you, God, Mr. Omnipotent, Omniscient, and Omnipresent? Where were you? What's really going on, God? And that seems an excellent place to introduce our prophet of the hour, one, Hosea. A little biographical background on him. The prophet Hosea began his career in the last days of Jeroboam II, whose 41-year reign capped a century of political stability and economic prosperity in the northern kingdom of Israel. Even with that, money could not buy them spiritual security. At the same time, right before Jeroboam's death, things got a little dicey. Tilgath-Pileser III, the new monarch in Assyria, Israel's neighbor, initiated a program of imperial expansion. Didn't that sound familiar? A prolonged national crisis ensued with the demise of the northern kingdom of Israel, which floundered under Assyrian assault. Over the next 20 years in Israel, leading up to its national demise, 4 of her 6 kings were assassinated as the nation veered between appeasement, all at the cost of heavy tribute, and rebellion, seeking futile alliances with Syria and Egypt. Hosea's prophetic career appears to end up to and near the Assyrian siege in Samaria, and I have to give you this little fact. It appears that Hosea's words were later reinterpreted to address a parallel situation in the southern kingdom of Judah. All of that said, Hosea was dealing with some stuff, y'all, and many of you may have heard about his home life. He is married to a woman, Gomer, and he names his children some, let's just call them interesting names. As a sidebar, Gomer had an interesting profession as well. Bible scholars at UR, go home and look it up. But the children had some interesting names. Like I said, one is named after a site where a bloody coup occurred involving Jezebel of Ahab and Jezebel fame. One's name means not loved or not pitied, and the third child has the most damning name of all. You are not my people, and I am not your God. Ouch. Hosea is dealing with some stuff, y'all. A marriage that is a parallel to God's dismissal of Israel, and then dealing with the chaotic days chronicling the fall of the house of Jehu, the king under whom Jeroboam's reign fell. Hosea is dealing with some stuff, y'all, and he has something to tell the people about their behaviors. Look at the text. Israel, he says to them, you are God's wayward child. Israel, you have lost your way. God says through the prophet, I loved Israel as a child, and out of Egypt I called my son, but the more I called them, the more they strayed. They kept worshiping other gods and sacrificing to idols. Now, if I was in the Baptist church in my youth, I could preach 45 minutes right there alone. If I had the chance, I would say something like, if America truly is a Christian nation, we could make the parallel that she truly is like Israel, for the more she is called to come to God, the further away she strays by not following God's command to love God and love neighbor. How she worships at the altar of mammon, we call it the stock market, and how money and how our children and women and our minorities and our poor and our disenfranchised are constantly being sacrificed to idols. If I were at the Metropolitan Baptist Church of my youth, I'd spend a few minutes talking about how gross and perverse this is. For a country that has more money than God allows people to go hungry at night, or removes programs from public schools that allow poor and undeserved children to eat meals for free, or if I really was going to preach this thing, how in one state in particular, the chief executive officer of that state, I call him Pharaoh, asked me about it after service, has decreed that his state will defy LGBTQ protections for the least of these, the babies. I would talk about the absolute perversity of a church stick-up job that happened last Sunday where a bishop and his wife were robbed of nearly $1 million in jewelry. $1 million. But guy, you ain't at the Metropolitan Church, so keep going, go back to the text. The prophecy continues. Israel will be returned to bondage, that's Egypt, and Assyria will be their king because they have refused to return to God. Oh, but this is a good prophet. He ain't done yet. The sword rages in their cities. It consumes their oracle priests. I call them pulpit pimps, y'all, and devours because of their schemes. Doesn't that sound familiar, guy? You ain't at the Metropolitan Church. Keep going. The prophet still ain't done. My people are bent on turning away from me. To the Most High they call. I call those thoughts and prayers, but he does not raise them up at all. Ooh, that one hurt me. But he still ain't done. God asks the people some questions that I can't fathom. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zebulun? Let me translate that for you. How can I give up one of my sons? How can I let you go back into bondage? How can I allow you to be destroyed? How can I do that? Why would I do that? But here's where the turn happens. God says, I can't do it because my compassion grows warm and tender. Go back to the text. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim. I am God and no mortal. I am the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. Look at what God says through the prophet. They will follow the Lord who roars like a lion, and when he roars, his children shall come trembling from the west. Look at what God says to God's people. They shall come like birds from Egypt, trembling, and like doves from the land of Assyria, and I will return them to their homes. That's nice, guy. I can see some of you saying, but what does that really mean? Well, I'm so glad you asked. This morning, it tells me that something better is on the way. It's got to happen. What am I trying to tell you this morning? I really don't know if I'm going to tell the truth because I'm still trying to form the questions about what's going on in the world. What I can deduce, however, is that eventually some mercy will come forth. I consider myself to be semi-intelligent. I can deduce that God will eventually grant us some peace. Again, I think I'm pretty smart some days. I can deduce that this thing is greater than me, and I'm not supposed to have all the answers. Those of you who know me know that I have no problem saying 3 words. I don't know. And sometimes I have to just sit with that. But this I do know. We have to do something about the things that we can do something about. And we cannot depend on our stuff. We cannot depend on our money. We cannot depend on our financial security. We cannot depend on our stocks and bonds. We cannot depend on our the fungible tangent stuff, the cyber currency. We can't depend on none of that because, like Jesus reminds us in the gospel reading, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So as I take my seat, got to tell you, I don't know. I don't have the answer. But this is what I do know. Money can't buy